Well, hello and welcome. I'm very excited that you're able to join us today for this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for an engagement company called Polco. Today, we have an excellent panel of local government leaders to share their perspectives on the topic of maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. We're going to be talking about the difficulties that communities are running into in building successful engagement, some of the challenges that they are facing, and some of the creative ways that they are successfully meeting that challenge. The whole intent of these conversations is that you pick up a new idea, a new perspective, something that you might be able to use in your communities as you're working through the same exact issues. Here's the format for today's conversation. We're going to take a few minutes for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I will kick off the conversations asking questions to draw out the way that communities are dealing with engagement during this very disruptive time. And then we'll provide a little opportunity for them to ask each other's questions if there's anything they want to explore a little deeper, and then we'll wrap it up. If that sounds good, we'll get underway. Let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Kristoff Bauer, who is the Deputy City Manager in DeSoto, Texas. DeSoto is a community in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Kristoff is an ICMA credential manager. He's got over 25 years of local government experience and has worked in Washington, Montana, Arizona, and North Carolina. He is also a recovering attorney with an MBA from the University of Washington, and has served as the manager or deputy in communities with populations ranging from 65,000 to 215,000. Kristoff has experience managing all areas of municipal government and has overseen numerous large-scale civic projects. Kristoff, in looking a little bit in your background, one of the things I was really impressed with was the construction of the minor league baseball stadium. Home of the Fayetteville Woodpeckers. Those projects are just such a significant impact on the community, and it must have been kind of fun to be part of that. But that being said, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Oh, sure. You know, as I said, 25 years in local government, it wasn't the path I started on, but what I did was I actually was a new attorney in downtown Seattle, and I moved to a suburb to start a family. And that city voted to incorporate just outside Seattle. And I got involved in the incorporation process. And I actually ran for the first city council. Thank goodness I lost. I think an elected official would be where I'd fit well. And so I was able to start in local government there. I actually became part of one of the first 10 employees to start that city and form it. And have moved on from there for 25 years in this career that I've kind of fell into. And it's really been interesting for me as I've moved from state to state to see the diversity and also the similarities between communities from one coast to the other.
What a cool experience for you to have your legal degree as well for helping communities, and that must have been a really cool experience.
It was very interesting. It was kind of funny. I was one of my degrees is in information systems. So one of the first jobs I did for that city was to put together their internet, or their local area network. And I was doing that, and the city manager walked over to me and goes, "You're an attorney, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, I don't understand what franchising means. Can you put together this franchising? You know, so I started negotiating cable and communication franchises, and then I helped them put together the criminal code, and just kind of snowballed from there. And it's been the thing that I find fascinating about this business is that's different every day.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thanks a lot for being available for this panel today. Let me introduce our second panelist. Darrin Tangeman is a town manager in Truro, Massachusetts. He's been in the job now for just a little bit over 2 months. And so best of luck, Darrin, as you get settled in that community. One of the interesting things about Darrin is that he's a former Green Beret and actually served in the military for 22 years. He's got 3 master's degrees in business administration, public administration, and defense analysis. And has been working in municipal government since 2015. Before coming to Truro, he's also served in leadership roles in Colorado. Darrin, that is a very impressive resume, but I'd love for you to add a little bit more to it if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I think you touched on most of it, but I think my time in the military helped to kind of drive my passion for local government when I was overseas. I lived in Fayetteville for a period of time, Kristoff, and so I had it for quite a while actually. Yeah, you probably realize my time overseas in Africa and the Middle East helped drive my passion to get into local government after I was complete when I retired. And my experiences with local governments overseas, I felt were directly relevant to the career that I have today. And it's something that I work pretty diligently on, and trying to get veterans into the local government profession. And right now I serve with ICMA as their chair for the Veterans Advisory Board for ICMA. And I work closely with their program manager to build advocacy and programming for veterans, to get veterans into local government.
That's excellent. That's just super. Thank you. Our third panelist is Tarik Rahmani, who's the Director of Finance at the City of Carson. Carson is actually a part of the Los Angeles metro area. Tarik has more than 2 decades of experience in local government, including having the opportunity to work for actually a school district in New Mexico. He's an experienced classroom instructor and lecturer in economics, organizational management, risk assessment, and public sector technology issues. Tarik, that is a wide array of skill sets. So congratulations on that. Would you mind, thanks you for being here, but would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you, Matt. I think you covered it all. As Kristoff said, I also worked for the city of Seattle, downtown Seattle, for about 12 years. And that's where really my understanding of the importance of local government really grew, and continued to work in the Northwest, a couple of years in the city of Bellevue, about 4 years before my family and I moved to Carson. And as Darrin said, I mean, he had experience internationally with the military. I had it the same way, but education-wise, I had the opportunity to get my bachelor's degree in Tunisia, North Africa. And by moving to New Mexico, when I finished my master's degree, that was a couple of years teaching in the classroom. Really is what makes me always look into my role as a finance director, as an instructor, and also a mentor to the citywide staff and how things should work. So I always take that approach. And as Kristoff said, I know a lot of cities we may think that we're different, but there's a lot of similarities. A couple of the things that we learned from the pandemic is how important the local government is. We're all dealing with issues such as homelessness, transportation, affordable housing. So yeah, that's how we got the passion of working in local government.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This just kind of based on your histories, I can tell this is going to be just an excellent presentation and discussion. Well, so let me kind of kick off the session. The topic today is maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. You know, COVID and everything else that has happened over the last year or so has just simply disrupted everything and any sense of normalcy in our communities. And given this unsettled environment, you know, it's just more important than ever to maintain a meaningful connection with community stakeholders. You know, we need to understand what is going on in their lives, what their current needs are, and what their priorities are. They need to feel like they're being listened to, because as their lives continue on and city continues to deliver public services, it just becomes more and more critical to make sure that that connection is there. The pandemic has presented all sorts of challenges for maintaining any sense of community. And so the opportunity today is to hear about your creative approaches that you have taken with engagement and helping residents to maintain that feeling of connectedness with the community and the local government that serves them. One way to maybe start out the conversation is to kind of look back or look at the problem. You know, I was a city manager for 30 years, and even before all of the disruptive things that have happened, engagement was never easy. People's lives are busy. There's all sorts of barriers and challenges to the way we operate as a municipal operation that just creates walls and difficulties for helping people to get connected on things that are impacting them on a daily life. So even before COVID started, many communities were struggling with engagement on an ongoing basis. And now you throw on a pandemic, And all of a sudden, it just becomes more and more challenging. People are having to adapt to a whole new world. They're homeschooling their kids while they're maintaining their job. They are organizations, municipal organizations are having to work virtually, at least a lot of them historically, many of them continuing on. And so that all of those connection points just becomes such an important thing to be paying attention to. Economic conditions, you've got all of the political unsettled feelings that are going on in communities too. It just makes it really difficult to successfully put together a successful engagement effort. So the question really then is, how do we become better listeners and engage the community in a more meaningful way? Here are the three questions that we're going to be exploring today. The first one is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? How does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And then finally, which tools are you using to help measure feedback from your residents during these challenging times, just to get a perspective on what their current issues and their needs are? So let's kick on to the first question. And Kristoff, I'd like to start with you. Kristoff, how has DeSoto's communication and engagement strategy evolved since the start of the pandemic?
Of course, this interview process is an example of exactly how it's changed. I mean, we don't have public meetings anymore. People don't walk into City Hall and sit down and watch a council meeting anymore. So there really has been a significant emphasis on technology and all of the strengths and challenges associated therewith. I mean, the nice thing is that people who may not have been able to have the luxury of going to a council meeting because they have family that they need to take care of now can, watch a meeting or even engage in a meeting. The problem is that engagement is a bit strained. It's not the same level of interpersonal interaction. When we go to these Zoom meetings, I think that there's always this sort of challenge with what I call over talking, because people aren't getting that feedback. They tend to just keep saying the same thing over and over again. So it's, how do we adjust to this environment? We've done a number of what we call virtual town halls, where we'll go out and have people present information in the virtual setting and put that out through social media. Our social media reliance has gone up dramatically. We provide a lot more information through social media than we used to in the past. It's become much more important to use those channels than we have in the past. And that has created, as I said, some benefits. We see some people participating that may not have done in the past, but also some significant limitations in the quality of that communication. You're muted, Matt.
I'm sorry, thank you. Kristoff, has the council's engagement practices changed much in terms of how they interact with the community?
It has, and a lot similarly, they seem to be a lot more reliant on social media. So it's about, as staff, we've got to watch that channel a lot more closely. I mean, over the last 10 years of my career, we've had this sort of debate about what is our role as in social media. Is that something that we let somebody else take care of? It's just chatting, or is it something we need to actively manage? And what resources do you apply? And I think in this environment, that shouldn't be a debate anymore. It's something that you really have to pay attention to. It's something you have to actively engage in and have to actively use that as a communication strategy.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Darrin, could you share a little bit about how your communication and engagement strategy has evolved in Truro since the beginning of the pandemic?
I kind of will touch on a couple. I've come from two different, just as you know, as you stated, I've been in Truro for about 2 months. And the interesting thing is that I'm coming to really two different communities in the political spectrum, one very red community and one very blue community. And I think that's been very unique in terms of the approach and the way that the community responds, I think. So how we have to adapt our strategy has been kind of difficult, I think, in this new environment. But In my previous community, we still had hybrid meetings for in terms of both combination of both hybrid and online, so in person and online, with limited public comment and but allowing public comment, obviously. So I've had the experience of seeing both fully online meetings, having to deal with a hybrid, which is probably the next step in the community here. And most communities will start probably trying to transition to more of a hybrid perspective, and whether or not we adopt hybrid into the future. I think the changes that have occurred have the potential to impact our future and how we engage our communities and bring a sense of community. So I do think we will likely see more of a hybrid approach, where it just really depends on your municipal, state or municipal or state statutes and code, and whether or not you can do that. And I think that's the general consensus that I feel here, is that there is a need or a preference to move to hybrid, because I think it's been beneficial to have that opportunity.
Darrin, even with your 2 months of experience, it may be a little bit difficult to answer this question, but have you got a sense for, are you working regionally with some of the adjacent communities on the Cape?
Oh yeah, we have a regional managers forum that we have, and we have monthly meetings with all the 15 Cape towns, and so we communicate quite often. Here we have the town meeting form of government, so we have an outdoor. Most of those are going to be modified because of COVID. So we meet usually once a year, to conduct town business, like the budget and approval, and that is an incredibly engaged opportunity outdoors as a result of COVID.
Do you have any idea how many people show up to the town meeting?
For us, so a quorum for us is 100 for town meeting, and we had over 250 or 300 at the last outdoor town meeting for COVID. We're expecting the same this year. So yeah, so we had to have it out in a baseball field, and had to have everybody social distance. It's immense. I mean, you can imagine having 300 people out in the middle of the baseball field and having to conduct an agenda out there and get public comment. So it was, I'm planning. I wasn't part of it. I watched it, and now I get a chance to facilitate that this year.
Oh, that's very interesting. What a unique way of engaging on a baseball field.
Yeah,
it's a good example. Tarik, how has Carson's communication and engagement strategy evolved over the course of the last year?
Well, I think we exponentially. I think we, as a city, and I think across all cities, we had to grasp with the changes in communication internally as well as externally with our community. As you can see in this pandemic, the local government, all cities have seen some technological innovation that we have done in 1 year that we haven't done for the last 20 years. But we always have that indicator that says local government lags behind private sector. But in the last year, we had to, as a human resources department, finance department, internal department, has to tackle the issue. What does it look like to work from home? And you have to have your staff really in place to be able to continue to provide these services to the community. And we have to continue business as usual, but in a virtual world. So we had to experiment with technologies we haven't done before. And at the same time, we had to do a lot of communication with the city council and our residents. I do remember, as Darrin said, that, making these communication in a digital way has also increased participation, in my view. There are some issues on topics where we had to even tackle the issue of security and how do we make sure that people who are getting to the Zoom meetings are really the one who's supposed to be in there, and make sure that information is secure. The network has the capability of sustaining that kind of workflow and inflow. So we tackled issues that we haven't seen before, and I think that's a good thing for us as local government that we should continue. And one thing I really learned for us and how we do things differently is that we realized how important digital communication is now. we realized that we have to be able to communicate our information to where our residents use their technological devices. I mean, if we just track the flow of visitors to our website pre-pandemic versus now, you can see a tremendous increase that folks now are coming to our local government sites to get information. Because as you can see in the first half during the pandemic, the federal government and states and local government, we were not on the same page. And folks did not really know what kind of policies we have. Different counties in the same state may have a different approach to the pandemic. And therefore, the concise and clear communication to our residents was very important. I'll give you one example. The city of Carson, really during the general election, we were looking at some of the new measures, tax measures basically, and we realized that now the things we had to do before, where we engaged the community before we propose a measure in the ballot, we don't have that opportunity anymore. We can't hold these in-person meetings. We can't do the educational one-on-one with our community like we did before, but at the same time, we still have the obligation to tell the story to our residents of how, whether they agree with this approach or not. So we had to do a collaboration with private sector companies who they do the digital communication much better than us, with the goal of sending a good information to our citizens as well as learning from that process. And it went successful. We had a lot of meetings and we really had to spend a lot of times on what type of information we're pushing out. And as they say, the saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So it was really important how we calibrate that. We also, the city of Carson partnered with a regional organization called the South Bay Coalition of Cities. And we adopted an approach that I was part of in Seattle, which is the Connectivity Consortium, where Seattle and City of Bellevue were building fiber around the Lake of Washington. So we collaborated here, adopting the same approach of building fiber, because we knew now how important that infrastructure is in the future. So we're in 1 year, like as I said, we've done things that we probably will take us 5-6 years on average.
Tarik, as a finance director, did you see much change in the levels of engagement during your budget process this last year?
Correct. I think that the reason for that is we are now, during the pandemic, we were pushing policies that were not usually before part of the budget. I think Kristoff and Darrin can agree with me that now local government, we push things like a small business loan programs and rental control and some of sort of a help to the community to tackle the issues of unemployment and how we can make sure that the community is taken care of. And you have to have the resources to be able to extend the hand to the community. And we've seen a lot of comments. On average, usually we get 4 to 5 comments during the budget process. We exceeded 20 to 25 because people were watching. They want to know if the city has the capability of connecting with the federal government programs that they offer, whether FEMA or the CARES Act. They want to know if the city really is able to allocate those resources. So there was a lot of transparency and a lot of engagement.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Thank you. Let's move on to the second question. Darrin, how do you think engagement influences how successful Truro is in maintaining its sense of community?
I guess I would take an example of we're getting ready to begin our process and our comp plan, comprehensive plan for the town. It's been over a decade since it's been updated, but I think the engagement of the community lends itself to legitimacy of outcomes, right? So you have to have a great degree of engagement for your community to feel like the outcomes that have been achieved are legitimate. And so I think the degree of resident engagement absolutely influences the how you maintain a sense of community. If you don't have engagement, don't have broad engagement from a large demographic perspective, socioeconomic perspective, you will likely find that the community feels like it's not legitimate. In our discussions in trying to go for requests for proposals for our comp plan in my previous town, one of our biggest concerns was how do we ensure there is representative engagement for that process in the midst of COVID. And so it was one of our biggest, if not our biggest concern, knowing that document would live for 10 years, and if it didn't have a sufficient engagement, it wouldn't be found to be legitimate, and it couldn't guide our policies for the next decade. And so I think it's incredibly important, and it's something you have to focus on, and a lot of tools to do that.
Darrin, I'm kind of, we've always taken the philosophy about the notion of, we call it kind of life cycle engagement, where you engage at the beginning, you engage in the middle, and you engage in the end. So it's an iterative process of always doing engagement. Is that consistent with in how you have approached comp planning and some of the other projects that you're involved with, or do you have anything to add or comment on that?
Well, I think one of our, I won't name consultants, but I think one of the great tools in comp planning is GIS, and being able to use GIS to help ensure you have achieved representative engagement of your community. And that's being able to record either polling or surveys or charrette meetings, whatever it might be, and ensuring that you have that truly in that process. You're taking demographic data and being able to represent it in an overlay in GIS in a way that your community and your elected body feel has accomplished what they want to achieve. And comp plan is probably the most engaged time in a community's periodic or routine engagement history. It happens, once every 10 years, and you're engaging probably the largest portion of your community during that time. So those tools out there and they're available, and if you use them, you can feel very good about being able to say that you achieved engagement of your community.
It kind of ties into what some of my introductory comments were, and that is that everything is changing right now, and so this engagement. And as you said, engagement kind of legitimizes outcomes, especially as you're getting into that comp planning process. Having the opportunity to have engagement today, especially as you're dealing with comp plan issues, helps you to build in all of the kind of the evolving dynamics of communities right now, right? You got to think of the long term, but you've also got some of these short term things that are going to have a tail for some time. Kind of comes back to Tarik's comment about. Or maybe it was your comment about the hybrid nature going forward, right? On how you engage with people. So just an observation, but thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Tarik, how does engagement play into your success in maintaining a sense of community in Carson?
Very important. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's how we get that feedback and how we push that information to our residents. We have established many methods, and I think one of the methods we have really focused on is the digital communication, again, through social media, and also setting up some indicators of measurements of how we ask these questions or how we measure public opinion on certain components of our work on an annual basis. So we do push annual surveys, whether it's budget process or comp plan, and we do gather this data on an annual basis. We push out performance indicators for even the community to see how things have changed from their input, as well as the information pushing out how we have been able to track towards our goals. So that communication and keeping it really measured and keeping it steady really has helped us really continue that trust between what we do and within the community. And as I mentioned to you, I mean, during the elections nationwide, we had a high turnaround, and the Carson measure has been overwhelmingly voted approved by our residents. And we had some surrounding cities around us who had almost similar measures, but the results were mixed. We were not. And again, every community is different, of course, but communication is really, and measuring that communication has been very important for us.
It's unique. You and Kristoff are both in large metro areas, and so while you want to maintain your own sense of community, it's within the context of a regional influence. And how would you classify or comment on engagement on a regional basis, or how your residents can engage locally versus in the region? Is there anything that you can suggest for other communities about how you have dealt with making it true to your community?
Correct. For me, I always look around our city of Carson, and I'm looking at the city of Long Beach, city of Los Angeles, Newport Beach. One of my best mentors used to tell me, Tarik, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And what she said about cheating is basically you have to look at what other cities are doing and other local government and learn from what they have succeeded at and learn from what they have really not succeeded at. Because at the end of the day, these common issues that we're now seeing, whether in a affordable housing, on homelessness or environment, I believe that local government is going to be the key factor in the next 10 years of how we are going to change how we do business. And for us to do that, as you said, Matt, no city is able to solve this problem alone. And you have to have either the ability to partner with other cities, or you have to be able to create some regional entities that can put these cities together into the same goal. For me, I think I learned by experience. There is a lot of examples from my time in Seattle and Bellevue. What I've seen, these kind of regional efforts are really successful because they don't only make them politically successful, they also make them economically feasible. So instead of you tackling a huge issue, whether in technology or housing or transportation, then you're joining efforts and the cost is not going to be allocated through all of them. So it is very important for me to stay in touch with the cities around me. And even if we tackle some issues and we are going to partner with another company to do an issue, I always make the calls and check in and see how the experience went. So we will learn from our there is another example, I think, just lastly here in Orange County, not LA County, where the city of Newport Beach and Costa Mesa joint partnership to create some sort of a temporary housing for the homeless during the pandemic, and none of them could have done it alone. And partnering with it, that gave us the opportunity to tell to our legislative body and also community that it's okay sometimes not to do things alone and to do it with other cities as well.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying. But a couple of points, just to bring it back to Carson. It sounds like Carson is a data-driven kind of community that has been successful in creating a sense of community just based upon the results that you've been able to have with some of your ballot measures that you've taken out to the community. So congratulations on that, because that's, I think, pretty it's a good indicator of how well you're doing. So thank you. Kristoff, how has engagement influenced DeSoto's success in maintaining its sense of community?
I think there's a couple of different ways to look at this, and reacting to both Darrin and Tarik, certainly partnerships are critically important. And I think one of the challenges you have in this environment with creating community is there are lots of things that we do as local government to try and create community. You mentioned that I was part of building a minor league baseball stadium and in our downtown in Fayetteville, and that was all about creating a sense of community. And during that first season, that stadium became the center of Fayetteville society. If you wanted to go see somebody or run into a local senator or a representative, you definitely went to the baseball game. And when this happened, that disappeared. And really there became a lot of isolation. And what I've missed as part of this is the side conversations. As Darrin was saying, when you go out and do your comprehensive plan or your planning, you want to have those charrettes. And they're a combination of a bunch of small conversations. And that's extremely difficult to replicate in this environment. How do you create that environment where people get together on a single topic, but then have 20 different conversations around the room? And we're going to have to find a way to try and do that, or find a way to come out of this. As Darrin was also saying, where are we going to go from here? You may have heard that COVID is over in Texas. The governor has said that now we're done with it, so we can stop wearing masks, etc. And one of the things that may change here is that currently the council's ability to meet virtually is only authorized through the current state of emergency. If that state of emergency goes away, then the council can't do this anymore. Some council members really like it. We have some young council members who have children. And so this becomes much more convenient for them. Same time, they're not perhaps valuing what we've lost in this dynamic. And so how do we sort of recapture that ability to have those small conversations? Darrin's just moved into a new community. I've just moved into a new community as well. One of the things I like to do when I move into a new community is go out and have some lunches, meet the managers next door, because those partnerships are critical. And those partnerships come out of informal conversations and relationships. And if you don't have that opportunity to go, just take somebody to lunch and get to know them a little bit, it creates, it makes that harder. So it's, again, how do we create community now? We try through virtual concerts. We used to have community concert series. Now those are all virtual. We've also emphasized here in DeSoto our library. So we have a community library, and unlike a lot of libraries, even through the center of this thing, we've kept our library open. We've limited participation. We've made sure people wear masks and sanitize. We check temperatures on the way in. So we keep people safe, but we stay open. And that has become a significant hub of community in this environment. Certainly not the significant things like a baseball stadium. We're not talking about 5,000 people. We're talking about 25 people. But it becomes something that they can recognize as being part. They can go get out of their house. They can get access to resources. They can use our computer lab to get online, because that's still, again, as Tarik was saying in his community, it's still a digital divide that has to be addressed. So it has impacted communities, I think, a central focus of what we do in local government. And we need to find new strategies and hopefully come out of this with a re-engagement to some of those old strategies about how important they really are.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up libraries, because libraries for a lot of communities end up to be that center of the community. And especially when you're in challenging times, we're doing a lot of work around libraries now, just with survey research about how they can evolve and adapt their plans to become that center of the community and continue to serve the community going forward. I am kind of curious though, because you've had this unique experience of this winter storm, anything that you can share with us about how the storm fit into people's sense of community in your community?
Well, again, it went to social media. It's like, where are people communicating now? And again, 25 years across several states, every community communicates different. In Fayetteville, the churches and the military associations are incredibly important to get information out. So it really depends on sort of how each community communicates. And in this environment, what I found, especially in DeSoto and through this piece, it really is about managing those social media. I mean, the reality is that even when power goes out, where do people go? They go to their cell phones, and they're looking for information on their cell phones. So what are you doing to manage the digital information that they can access on a small screen? And that means you've got to go through things like, Facebook, Twitter, things that really fit in that environment. And that's where they're going to for resources. But still, you got to remember your community partners. We still had to rely on churches and others to, again, find the people who had need, because that's where they naturally go. It says, where do your people go when they're in trouble? And then re-engaging with those community partners and making sure you're there to help.
Yeah, that's very well said. Thank you. One of the interesting things that we've also found, and we probably have all known it, trust in local government has always been high. It's certainly been higher than state or the federal levels, but actually trust in local government over the last year has actually gone up. And I think it's in part because of the jobs that local governments have done in serving and meeting the needs of their residents kind of during this really disruptive time. So you're endorsing and kind of explaining a little bit more about why that's happening. So thank you. Let's move on to the third question. And I'd like to start with you, Tarik. Tarik, can you talk about the tools Carson is using to help measure feedback from your residents and businesses during this public health emergency?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the things we started with, myself and our current city manager, Cheryl Landers, we partnered with an organization called Management Partners. We don't want to measure things just for the sake of measuring. We want to connect these measurements to what we call the city council priorities. So what we have started with is looking back. It's been a while since we have kind of polished this, where we go in the next 5-10 years, and we set up the foundation right now of, re-editing what I call the city's mission, vision, and priorities. And from those priorities, we are going now to connect everything we do in the city, whether financially or operation-wise, to measure how these indicators really are connected to the council established priorities. Actually, just yesterday, Darrin and Kristoff knows that, and you yourself, Matt, knows the budget process is probably one of the most, I can say, complex, at the same time important process in the city. That's how the city's resources are going to be invested in what the community believe is the best areas we want to do. And for the first time now, we are going to look at the budget from the priorities perspective instead of doing a status quo budgeting process. So measuring these elements, whether you can call it, I think for us now, it continues to be number one priority is public safety. And then the number two is going to be economic development, and then technology, etc. So measuring, making these measurements and making them part of our presentation to the legislative body, as well as pushing this information digitally to our residents, has been a good approach, because I know, maybe I'm picking again on the example of Measure K here in the city of Carson. I'm sure the future is going to probably bring other things that we want to go to the city resident to have their input, whether we should go in one direction or another. So building this back and forth data and measurements and report and telling consistently to our resident how we are doing internally and regionally and financially is a tool where we go back to our community for their support in any initiative. We'll find them ready to support us. And I think one of the things we're doing right now is me personally working with the information technology department to kind of establish an open data portal in our website, not only for the financial data, but also the non-financial data. I'm talking permit issuance, construction, even measurement of things like pothole, street maintenance. And our goal is by June, we push this data out, and we'll see how our community is going to do that. And our community, most of it sometimes is the business community. As one example, I want to mention is the LA Galaxy home. Carson is home of the LA Galaxy soccer team, and we have a Dignity Health here stadium, where Dignity Health really approached us and the Los Angeles County to make the stadium as a vaccination destination. And we worked together really on pushing this information out. We pushed also the metrics on a weekly basis on how many cases we have in Carson, how many people have been vaccinated. Yesterday, the county pushed a map, a GIS map, to look at how each city in LA is percentage-wise is dealing with the vaccination rates. And just for those 2 weeks where we had really a bigger inflow of folks going to get vaccinated in the stadium, now Carson is at about 24% of vaccinating the community, which is one of the highest thresholds, including, of course, City of Long Beach is still leading in this area. But and these kind of metrics, as I mentioned, then you do one thing and then you push the data to the resident, tell them this is how we've done. And you don't always have to be afraid of things are not good either. I think you have to embrace the red if things are not really good. And sometimes you get some feedback that can change the course of action.
Yeah, that's very well said. Thank you. Do you have any methods in place right now for during the course of the year for engaging with residents? I mean, I really appreciate the community survey work and tying it into the council priorities, but on a day-to-day basis, or even with your council meetings, how do you right now allow for folks to contribute to things going on in the community?
Well, we have something that's been very successful. We've been pushing through social media a portal where we can have this comments in writing about how we do. And I personally get them almost sometimes daily and sometimes weekly. And we want folks to tell us how they want us to do a certain process. I think one of the comments I received lately was, there's a lot of talk about policing and a lot of talk about have been in how much of the city's resources go into the sheriff's department, etc. And that clicked in my mind with just getting that comment, realized that maybe the next time I go into the city council budget workshop or a financial quarterly report, I will speak with the city manager as well as the city council, or shedding a little bit of light of how much of the resources go to the public safety, but also the return on investment. Let's talk about how the crime rate decreased, the traffic congestion, and all of these things, so we can see the return on investment. And this back and forth communication through the community giving us those comments, it really helps.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Kristoff, what tools are you using in DeSoto to help you measure feedback from your residents?
Well, of course, we've talked a lot about the importance of social media and working in this electronic environment. And I think that what we all need to pay attention to is that these forms of communication are susceptible to the same pitfalls that communications were in the past. And that is, I actually went to an ICMA conference more than a decade ago, and they used this term. It's the tyranny of the vocal minority. And I think that this electronic format actually can amplify that when you have a few voices that can get online, and that message that can be amplified in this environment where the number of voices may be constrained. And so single voices can even now become more powerful. So how do you, as a manager, try to respond to that? And I think one of the effective tools that I've used, we've used in a number of different communities, is really the tool of the community survey. And Tarik had mentioned this earlier. And it's not just going out and surveying the community, but surveying about the issues that the council is very concerned about. And then we actually, one of the things a little bit unique here in DeSoto, in order to validate that, we actually used GIS to locate, the people who were responding, so that the council and the community could see, we actually did get feedback from the entire community. And we used demographic data of responders to show that it matched the demographics of our community. So we're saying we not only were getting opinions, but we're really getting a good cross-section and a valid opinion from the community. And I think that's helped over time to buffer against that sort of tyranny of the vocal minority, where, in Fayetteville is another example, there was a real concern about the solid waste service, and a few complaints was driving a significant political interest. And it took 4 or 5 years of data from community surveys that service was right behind the fire department. And if you've ever done a community survey, fire department's almost always at the top. Right. So if you have your sanitation department like 2 points behind your fire department, you're probably doing something right. And it took that over and over again. Another term we use in the business is confirmation bias, where people, if they have an opinion, it's very hard to change that opinion. And the only way you can do it is through consistent, persistent communication, and providing data that is inconsistent with their assumption or their bias. And the community survey method, I think, is one that I've found. And then going back to, again, Tarik's excellent examples of metrics. You've got to have those performance metrics that you can go back and say, okay, I understand you're concerned about solid waste. Understand that our current error rate is less than 1%. Now, 1% of, given we have 70,000 customers and we hit them 3 times a week, that's 2,100 opportunities to fail. So 1% failure rate is still more than 1.
Right.
But you have to put that into context. And that's the strategies I'd recommend, is going back and use some of the strategies you have in the past. Understand they're more important now and don't forget them based on sort of the limited opportunity that you have.
Yep, that's very good. Always paying attention to data, being as proactive as you can. I mean, great comments. How are you engaging residents during council meetings right now?
Well, they have the ability to Zoom in. They come in as participants. We escalate them, and they actually have an opportunity to join the conversation virtually. Some of them do that. They also have the ability to do written comments, which are read by the city secretary. So those things still happen. And actually, we've seen a lot of participation. I think sometimes people find that more convenient than having to get up and come to City Hall, sign in, and step in front of council. So I think that the participation here has actually increased. I think that the challenge is, again, sort of how do you put those into context, and how do you give them the opportunity to understand how that fits with the rest of the community?
Yeah, interesting. That's great. Thank you. Darrin, what tools are you using in Truro for measuring resident feedback?
I don't think I can. I mean, I think Tarik and Kristoff have touched on some of the things I talked about earlier as well, and that I think the basis of legitimacy in all of our engagement is tied to being able to demonstrate that we've reached out to the right demographic or a broad spectrum of our community, and being able to prove that. And so the surveys, the community GIS overlay showing that and adding the demographic data, I think those three best practices are incredibly beneficial and important in the way that you can demonstrate your legitimacy in terms of any of the outputs that your community can achieve. And so I think those are best practices, and it's something that I've seen used and seen that I've used as well. I don't think you can top that. I think that's something that should be a baseline for most communities. I think looking kind of more of a proactive perspective in smaller communities, in engagement opportunities, maybe something that I personally practice is when you have more of a controlled environment, more of an opportunity to engage a broad spectrum of your community, intentionally sending out invitations, personal invitations from maybe the town manager's office, city manager's office, to engage or participate in opportunities, and trying to do that in a way that brings in a broad spectrum of your community. So intentionally finding, you're not finding a broad spectrum and sending those invitations directly to your community to get that started, and hey, invite members of your community to this process as well. So I found that to be something that is beneficial in driving legitimacy. It drives the Socratic method as well in terms of discussing the issues that you are trying to address, and getting feedback from a broad spectrum of the community, and having them understand each other. So I think that's one way a small community can ensure that you feel that you have legitimacy ahead of the end state, right? Ahead of getting to the end and having to prove it. Start up front by ensuring that you're inviting a broad spectrum of your community to the table, so that they feel like they have a voice and that they're heard.
Darrin, are you outside of the town meeting, are there practices that you use right now for engaging your residents on issues that are impacting the community on a day-to-day basis?
Well, one of the things that we're talking about is online office hours for our elected body, and those are somewhat difficult, but I think that's one tool that can be used. Traditionally, we would have meetings here at our transfer station, where our elected body would be there to meet for office hours and engage our community on issues of importance. And now we obviously don't have that because of the restrictions. So there is a request to start doing that, and that can be done in a number of different ways, tools like we're using right now. But I think that's one tool for at least our elected body to feel engaged, and they can cross-reference it to what in terms of the effectiveness of it, can cross-reference to the level of engagement that they achieved during their in-person office hours that occurred during their the transfer station meetings.
Yeah, It just goes to show you how important solid waste is in a lot of communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's actually one of the statistics that's really ticked up for us is solid waste under COVID, and so it's kind of one of the indicators that we're seeing for changes in population density here in a tourism economy that we've seen. So I think it is actually, it's one of the more important ones to keep an eye on.
Yeah. That's cool. Gosh, this has been great. I'd love to just open it up to each of you if there's anything that you want to ask each other, anything that is on your mind.
Well, I'm wondering, in California, how's it going with, how's the population doing there? I've heard that there's been a lot of demographic shifts, lots of people sort of migrating out of the California area. Is that hitting your region, Tarik, or are you seeing something different?
Well, you know what? As they say, they call it the tale of two Californias. So we have South California and we have the Bay Area. So Bay Area has been always the last couple of months talking about the exodus, and they are using sales tax data to measure activity, whether activity has declined or activity has grown up. There are some moving companies also pushing some data right now, and the Wall Street Journal is looking at it to see what the migration is. And you get mixed signals, really. And you have announcement from bigger CEOs, larger than life, like Elon Musk making his announcement that he is thinking to move to Austin. However, though, I don't think that as significant as really the perception is. And I don't think Silicon Valley is going to go away, honestly. And I don't think, like you can see in Seattle, those we call them the jewel of the U.S. economy companies, they're going to move away because it will take a lot for a major shift for a company to go from point A to point B. That's not happening if you look at the bigger picture. However, that's not going to tell us that it's not going to happen in the future. I think you have to have infrastructure. My lesson from that, Kristoff, is with the story with Boeing. When Boeing had some challenges in the Northwest, we talked about labor unions and all of that, and start looking at North Carolina, looking at other places where they can put in a shop for Boeing 777 or the Dreamliners line. And there have been some engineering issues that it's not really the same. They're not able to move people with them as well. You're not going to have all those engineering body you created over decades in Seattle and have them go with you there. And then when we go to North Carolina, you may not have the same internal control of the product you've been proud of to have the same issues now. And they're dealing with it now. Some of it, all these issues here with Boeing is sometimes related to the change of culture. But I think we have to look at it from the bigger prism. Yes, there are issues in the Bay Area where it can be a significant push for these companies and also for people to move out, especially the affordability of housing. The South Bay and LA continues to be the same thing. It's totally different economic industry. We're looking more about import and export. We're looking about services. Manufacturing is big here. There's a lot of oil refineries, and those, you can't move $1 billion oil refineries somewhere else. So yes, those data are out there, but I'm not really too worried about it.
Yeah. I think that's interesting to hear. It's kind of a similar experience in Fayetteville where there was a BRAC realignment a couple of years ago, and there was expectation of significant migration of businesses out of the Georgia area, and the soldiers came. The businesses did not. And I think it goes back to, people, community is important. That's why this conversation is important. People choose where they want to live because that's the part of the community they want to be part of. And, the world changes and shifts around, but that they really aren't as mobile as economists like to think that they are. I think that lots of times they want to stay in the community they want to stay in. They put their roots down, and they're more likely to adjust maybe what they do rather than where they do it. And it's going to be interesting to watch how that moves over time. I think everybody thinks that everyone in the world's moving to Texas. I can tell you, my son works for Google, and he's in DeSoto right now. So it'll be interesting to see how the world changes after this and how what going to work means. But I'm not sure that anybody has the answer for that yet.
Right.
Well, I think it's also infrastructure. I think these companies that you see, they move millions of data daily, and you have to have that infrastructure digitally, fiber and everything else, and data centers that can have that capability. I mean, if other cities build that infrastructure and make it more economically attractive, and I think Austin now, and also I would believe Denver, Colorado, have been really pushing the envelope of making their city as attractive to these companies. And I don't think if economically makes sense to a company and they can continue to do what they do, I won't wonder why we will make that move.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a great conversation. I love the way that all of you have talked about how this whole engagement process in the last year, how you've had to be adaptive. I love the fact of hearing about how proactive you are, so that you're thinking about ahead of time and trying to align your community needs with the council priorities. You all recognize the value of the use of technology for getting engagement to happen and the importance of that. But you also have mentioned the importance of working with your community partners, and that you can never really replace that personal touch in making sure that you're having those good connections and using your community partners in that process. One of the things that I just really want to emphasize is all of you have talked about the importance of being open with your data and being data driven on the decisions that you're making. So it just strikes me that all of you are doing just great work on stepping up to the challenge of maintaining a sense of community in your communities through your practices of engagement. I want to just thank all of you for being part of this conversation today. I'm going to follow up and I'll give you all of the information for each of you so that you can connect with each other if you'd like. We do these panels every Thursday. I'm also doing a complimentary panel, which actually focuses in on law enforcement and how the community perspectives play into the delivery of police services. And so if your police chiefs might be interested in participating in a similar kind of a conversation, I would welcome you to invite them to connect with me. These sessions are all about just sharing information and sharing solutions and ideas. And you will start seeing your recordings show up on LinkedIn, and would welcome you to share those within your network so that other people who you're connected with can benefit from your comments. And I'll probably connect with you within the next week just to get feedback on how this panel went. I'd always appreciate how to do this better and how we can make these sessions a little bit more impactful on what we're trying to accomplish. But with that, I just want to thank all of you for being here and participating. I love this because I get to meet 3 new people every week and hear great ideas of what's going on around the country. And none of you have disappointed me at all in that realm. So thank you. I thank you for your time, and best of luck with everything that you're doing.